This is lab-created green quartz. In fact, these are the only pieces of lab-created quartz of any color that I have in my inventory. I just don't buy lab-created quartz as I almost never cut it. So these pieces have been laying around for a while. Quartz can be made in the lab. It's been made in the lab for many years, and lab-created quartz is not expensive. However, in general, natural quartz is not expensive. So for me, I prefer to buy and cut natural quartz. But I think I'll give cutting this lab-created quartz a try, just to see how it cuts and get a feel for it, see how it cuts and polishes. I suspect that it will cut and polish just like natural quartz. I'd be surprised if it didn't. So I found this design called the Kelpie Cut when I was on the Victoria Fast String Group website, and the design was created by Kel Smith, and he named it the Kelpie Cut. Now, if you have a look at the design closely, you can see that the P3 tier of instruction calls for you to cut into the girdle on the pavilion side of the gemstone just a bit. And it isn't often that you come across a design that cuts into the girdle on purpose. So I want to see what effect this has on the final stone. Here are the instructions for the Kelpie Cut. I'll give this design a try on a large piece of lab-created quartz just to see what the final gemstone looks like. I've preformed the green lab quartz. Got a little chip right here, but that'll work its way out. All I've used so far is the 240 grit popper, and now I'll go over it with the 320 grit and then the 600 grit, and just go from there. Okay, the fracture here, the crack right along here. I'm not sure what caused that. I haven't worked with synthetic quartz before, so I'm not sure if it has anything to do with the way it grows. I didn't use a rough enough lap. I used a 240, was the roughest I got, and I would expect you could probably get away with 100 grit without any substructure damage. Not sure, but I know I don't use my 60 grit lap anymore because that did cause substructure damage. But I'm not sure what caused this, so the question is, can I just lower the pavilion and get rid of it? And to answer that question, you need to know if you have enough rough left in the bottom for the crown. So the stone, you take the width of the stone, which is about 14 millimeters, times your C to W ratio, C divided by W, which is given to you in the instructions of your gem fastening diagram. And for this Kelpie Cut, the C to W ratio is 0.281. So 0.281 times 14 millimeters gives you 3.9. So you need 3.9 millimeters plus the girdle. Now this Kelpie Cut, I want to cut the girdle a little bigger, a little thicker than normal, because one of the facets on the pavilion, the P3 facet, will actually cut a little into the girdle with this cut, kind of unique. So I probably need 4.4 millimeters in the bottom half of this stone. And I have plenty, but the bottom of that fracture is about right there. So I just barely have enough, if I don't make the stone any smaller, to just lower the pavilion and cut out that fracture. But again, I've only used my roughest lap, so I can go ahead and just lower the pavilion. The stone will be a little smaller anyway when I go to my other laps, 600, the 12M, and the 3000 grit diamond before I polish it. So I think I'll be okay. I'm gonna just work that fracture out, but I'm not gonna use a 240 grit. I'll use my 320 grit. I don't want to take any chances with any substructure damage, so I'll go around the pavilion a couple times with that and take care of that fracture. Okay, I used my 340 grit topper and brought the pavilion down to get rid of almost all of that little crack fracture inclusion there. There's a little bit left. I still have over 5 millimeters left for the crown, but I've got a number of other laps to use before I get to polish, so I'm not going to worry about the rest of that fracture right now. I'll cut that out with the other laps as I work through them. So now I'll switch to the 600 grit topper and continue to work on the pavilion. I finished going over the green quartz, lap quartz, with my 12M lap, which is a 1500 grit sintered lap. And I decided to hold off on the P3 and P5 tiers or rows. And the reason is I want to get the steps to line up. And the P3 will cut here, and the P5 up here. And if I cut those now, I won't be able to see, I won't be able to meet these steps right here. So I think I'll go through polishing the step cuts first, and then go back and cut the P3 and P5 tiers last. So now I'll move on to the 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap. Okay, I finished pre-polishing most of our Kelpie Cut with the 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap. Now I have not yet cut the P3 or the P5 facets, which are the P3 runs along here and just cuts into the girdle, and the P5 runs along here, forms a permanent center point, and meets somewhere down here. So the reason I haven't cut those yet is I wanted to make sure that my steps all lined up, and if I would have cut those two, there'd be a gap here where these lines wouldn't touch. So I was afraid I might get a little bit off on those lines, so I wanted to wait and cut those P3, P5 last. So now I think I'm going to polish. I may polish all of this before I cut the P3, P5, but for sure I'm going to go right now polish the girdle and at least the P1, probably the P2, P4. And I'm going to try polishing with cerium oxide on a creamway lap. I finished polishing the pavilion bottom half of our green quartz, except for the P3 and the P5 facets, which are going to run along here. I'll go in and work those now. Haven't touched them at all, and the reason is I wanted these step cuts right here to line up and here. And I felt that if I had a gap here with these P3 and P5 facets, it'd be harder to see if these steps are exactly in line. So now I'll go back with the 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap, rough in those P3 and P5 facets, pre-polish them in, and then polish them. Okay, I finished polishing the bottom half of the pavilion of the green quartz. Everything matched up just fine. I'm going to transfer it now and be able to start working on the upper half of the crown of this stone. I finished polishing the green quartz with 3000 grit diamond on a bat lap, and I was going to go with the 13,000 grit diamond on a bat lap and pre-polish it again, but there's really no need. All the meats are where I want them. I did make another row up here. I just used the same indexes as the final tier and just dropped it to maybe, instead of 31 degrees, to 20 degrees. And that allowed me to cut this row, and that means it gets rid of a lot of this facet. It was kind of a triangle tape shaped facet, and now when I go back and polish that final row, I won't have to worry about anything above here. And again, these meats are above this meat point, so when I cut the table, it'll just cut these out, this top row out. So it's just made for one less row that's in my way. It made these top facets a lot smaller, so when I polish, there's a lot less facet that I have to polish. So now I'll polish this stone with the creamway lap and cerium oxide. Finished polishing the crown of our green quartz, and now I'll set the table adapter up so I can cut the table. Okay, the table's polished on our Kelpie Cut with the creamway lap and cerium oxide. So now I'll soak the stone in acetone and get the two-part epoxy off, and we'll be able to see what this Kelpie Cut looks like. This Kelpie Cut is a very interesting and unique gem design, as it has one row of facets that cut just into the girdle on the pavilion side. The design is not difficult, but it has a lot of tiers or rows where you have to judge by eye where to make the cuts. I'm not sure that this wouldn't be a little bit frustrating for a brand new cutter or not. It seems to me easier for a new cutter to be using meat points to line up his or her facets. But that may just be me. Maybe a new cutter would just love this design. This is also one of the very few times that I've cut lab-created quartz. This rough, cut, and polished exactly like natural quartz without any noticeable differences, except I did get a fracture in the stone when I was preforming it, and I'm not sure if that was because my 240 grit lap was too rough for lab quartz, or if it was because of some other reason that I just don't know the answer to. I would recommend you give the Kelpie Cut a shot. I think you'll like the design. It cuts a great stone. Let me know what you think. And as always, happy fasting, everyone.